Hey there, welcome back everyone. This is part 3 in the Corsair build series. This is a F4U-1D Tamiya 1/32 as a reminder. If you haven't seen the first couple of videos, I'll put the links in the description. I'll add the little links in the video. I'll figure out how to do that. As you can see, this has come together very nicely. It's a flagship Tamiya product, so you can't really expect anything less. I've done the Iwo Jima 1945 USS Bunker Hill version. I was attracted to the yellow cowling, if I'm being really honest. Simple colors, simple mind. And I'd never done one of the Arrow versions. So that was the direction I was heading in from day one. But as you can see, it's come together very, very nicely. What I also will do is, towards the end of the video, give a brief comparison towards a trumpeter kit, in that case a F4U-4. It's not exactly the same, but especially in the case of the flaps, you can see it's designed or engineered a bit differently, so that's interesting to see. Moving right on to the build, in this case we'll be getting into the painting and finishing. I've started with 1500 Mr. Surfacer. That just gives a nice base, especially when you're coming into the yellows. They never look good without a light substrate. I think technically from an artistic point of view it should be pink, but white works. Because there's a lot of area to cover, just surface area in these big planes, I do mix the paint externally using Mr. Leveling Thinner to thin the paint to the right consistency. One other interesting thing I am doing in this plane, which is a change as I've developed over the years, and that is trying not to almost do a paint by numbers effect. In my early days, what I would tend to do is get it exact. And by that I mean like the whole thing was exactly blue or grey and so on. In reality, as I developed over the years, I've tried to, I'd say, almost add some shading and variety to my painting. I'm not sure. I think that's purely a subjective thing and almost the artistic side coming out. But the way I'd describe it is, yeah, when you're a kid, you tend to want to get all the red in this area, all the blue in this area, and so on. But real life's not quite like that. So in this case, there is a bit of deliberate or method in the madness as to the way I'm airbrushing this, even in the sense that I'm doing the components differently. That used to really worry me. So for example, the wings or the rudder and so on, I used to really stress about making sure it was all the same. But in reality, a lot of those parts all come from different subcontractors and so on anyway. So there was that aspect to the paint and finish, and also just in reality different wear and exposure, maybe a tarpaulin here and there and whatever else was going on, part of it in the shed, part of it out and so on. So that's what I'm really doing here, trying to almost give a bit of shading and variety, because otherwise, especially on something like this, it can just end up looking blue. And one of my earlier ones, which I'll show at the end, I did do that. So you can see here where I'm painting all the components essentially separately. As I say, partly that is cosmetic, I suppose you would call it. One of the other reasons obviously is just practically, even with my spray booth setup, to do a 1/32 Corsair takes up a lot of room, and to do it all in one go just becomes a bit unmanageable. I would also say, don't do what I do wear gloves. I do have them sitting there, but, well, yeah, just ignore my example there. Use gloves and take all the proper safety precautions. In this case, I do have a very good spray booth setup, custom made, all of that, custom built, however you'd call it. This is always a cool part, taking off the masking. I always get a kick out of that. You can see what I've done to protect the engine itself, and I do this in all my builds. I'll actually dampen down tissue paper to get it to fit into those protected areas, so the water or moisture will just help it conform, give me a really good seal. The yellow, as I say, do make sure you put a good ground underneath that, essentially white or pink or something like that. This is just more of components, in this case the undercarriage wheel covers or wheel bay covers. At this point everything is getting blue. I'm getting a bit sick of blue. For the propeller, it's always cool. I think it's where you start to... It really hits home just how big these planes are. I've done the yellow tips, and again, this is just straight masking work. Shouldn't be any great dramas for anyone to do. Originally, it was just black and then the yellow tips. I'm just using, I think it's just hardware painter's tape for the bulk of it. I do use modelling tape to form almost a gasket on the edge, and then I'll use either just cheap masking tape or, in this case, blue painter's tape from the hardware store or wherever you get it, to do a lot of the bulk cover-up. If you were doing especially these large-scale planes with just modeller's tape, it would cost a fortune. Again, it's always really neat to basically take this tape off and see how good a job you've done. I do think the propellers is one thing that I always get a bit of a surprise. Just it does hit home the size that you're working in. So you can see that comes off nice. The blue painter's tape, which I think is worldwide, it's probably all out of China or somewhere, is good. One other thing I'd say with masking tape is try and find the cheap stuff. The cheaper it is, almost the better, because you actually don't want it to be too good at stickiness, especially if you're using acrylic paints and so on, which you're going to have more trouble generally with masking on that side because they're not as durable or tough. Once all of that blue paint's out of the way, it really just becomes detailing, decals, touching up. It's just slow grind at this point. One nice thing about the World War II planes is generally there's not as much in the way of decal work. So there's the plane as it's coming along. I've obviously jumped ahead. Out of interest, this is Blue Federal Standards 15050. So whichever manufacturer works for you, use that. So where possible, I do try and do the decals separately per component. It just makes it a bit easier to work on. And again, especially with a large plane, it can be a hassle and you can end up breaking things if you're moving the whole plane around just to get something lined up or get into a fiddly spot. So that's why the propeller decals are going on separate, and then eventually the propeller will go on. And I think that holds true for most scales. Even if you're doing a 1/72nd bomber, it still makes sense to do it that way. So they're definitely coming together. There is a lot of large decal work in this, and there you can see some of that sort of shaded effect that I've thrown in there. It's weathering, but lightly weathering. That's a whole argument in itself. Here's an example of the other side going on. One thing with the decals here, I did one side and very careful to take my time on these because they are large decals and you don't want to get into that situation where you're fixing one side and then accidentally moving the other side. So I did essentially do one side at a time. The other thing I would say here, and I was generally a little bit impatient. I was originally going to mask these and paint them that way because there's no doubt it does look better and it does give you a better effect in the end. But for some reason I had trouble with my cricut machine, whatever you call it. And in the end I gave up. I was wasting too much time messing about with tech than actually doing it. So what I do is when this is all done, I actually come back with that blue and I'll lightly blend, essentially blend things in, especially where you've got a hard white. Having said that though, there is absolutely nothing wrong with the Tamiya decals out of the box. I know there's rumours floating around that they can be a little thick and so on, but what I did do is again, over probably a week, 10 days, each time I come past it, just put some more decal softener on. So we're already into essentially like the warnings and disclaimers and all of that side of the decals. One thing I have found that has really helped over time, or one thing I've learned, is I've used the tweezers a lot more, especially for those small decals. It does make a difference, and they're actually tougher than you think if you've never done it that way before. One important point, and I think we've all probably done it, is things like your armaments and your loadout. generally do all your decals first, because if you're coming back trying to do this now, after you'd put the missiles on or whatever you wanted to put on, it gets very difficult very quickly. So this is really just detail work at this point. The major worry just becomes about getting them squared up. And as I say, if you're not careful, if you're trying to do too much too quickly before they dry, probably not so much on these larger scale planes, but in general, I suppose, it is easy to go, wow, that looks great. I've got one side done and you've actually moved the other side. So generally what I'll do, get them on, let them dry, and then I'll come back and start softening them up. So what I did do here is I've gone with these 1,000 pound bombs. I just liked it to be a bit different. I've got plenty with drop tanks. I'm not sure how practical that is. I guess for short missions, as they were doing then, makes sense. There's a bit of fiddling around getting the yellow warning rings, I guess, on these. The color is just olive, I think drab olive green, and the mounts, it's a bit fiddly, but I do think these sort of fine details are what really starts to make it come together. I essentially float it on water, as you can see. I use a toothpick or essentially whatever works and is good at moving it around, and then I'll take off the excess water, let it sit, and then I'll come back. Once it's actually bedded down a bit, you can use microsol. I haven't had as much luck with that, but essentially you want it to start to get at least to the tacky sort of phase before you even start softening it. The other thing is once you add the softeners, whatever brand you're using, you're almost locked in. The only way you're getting it off is to scrape it off. Whereas even if I want to come back the next day, not guaranteed, but generally if you see you've made a mistake, you can re-wet it and start moving it around again. Once you add the softeners, yeah, it's probably gone forever. It's a clean-up job rather than a repositioning job. So as I say, there's a bit of fiddling about there, especially on these curved surfaces, but in the end it all comes together. I think just from a cosmetic point of view, I did want something different than blue, 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 blue everywhere. At the end of the day, this is going to go up on the shelf, so I think it just having that bit of variety, in this case with the olive drab and the silver rockets and so on, just gives it a bit more bling. The decals on this bomb with the compound curves are almost screaming out for decal softener, but as I say, I like to hold off. It doesn't have to be a brush. Make sure they're positioned, squared and all that. So here we are. I think these are 5-inch, 6-inch rockets. Can't remember, I'd need to check. But essentially I've just masked these up, come through and done the decals, which you can see here. Again, this is just all detail work at this point. Silver and olive drab for the rockets, and then there's 2 decals to go on. You can see there on the bomb where I've already started to come back with the softener, so that's gone down nice. There is a bit of etched metal in this kit. I think it does add just those nice little finishing touches, as you can see here, arming up these bombs. And I think the exhaust nozzles here just, again, CA glue, super glue, whatever you want to call it, drops in there, and again it's a bit fiddly, but it all goes together nicely. There's no great dramas with this. I think there's 8 rockets. That's the only bit that's a bit frustrating. I think that was a couple evenings work. And here, these are the actual pylons for those bombs. Again, they were done separately. Do make sure that you pay attention to any drilling that you need to do, and that applies to any kit. In this case, I was messing around with the stand. Originally, I was going to do this in flight, but I can't say I was hugely impressed with the stand itself because it's not very configurable, and I think the idea here is that it's designed to be a certain way out of the box. If anything, that would probably be my big criticism of this kit, that it's not what I'd say super flexible. it looks great if you follow the instructions and so on. But for example, the ailerons, I've done one up and one down, because originally I was thinking of doing it that way, but I probably changed my mind half a dozen times through the build. What I'm doing here is just doing the rocket pylon where it goes over the ensign, so there's white to make it match. For the navigation lights, what I've got here, firstly I come through and I put a drop of silver in each one, then I'm coming through putting the lens on, and now onto the clear colors. Over the years, the one that I keep gravitating back to is the Tamiya clears. For some reason, I really like them. And I think it's a good example, even though I'm a big fan of, say, the Mr. Hobby these days. I actually think the Tamiya clear at least works for me much better. It's got like I don't know the reasoning or the chemistry or anything like that, but it just seems to work better, have a bit better and smoother coverage and consistency. So that's the red, green and yellow go on there. And they come up very nice as well. You can see over time, even the decals, even those large ones, do bed down nicely. But as I say, that's a lot of just patience, repeated applications over many evenings. The actual port and starboard lights, I have to admit I was a bit cautious on this because I'm used to doing the red and green. However, I know that it wasn't always standard up until probably, I guess, the war itself. Someone can probably tell me the details on that, but either way, they're not going to be bright red and green unless they're on. So you can see how fine the detailing is on the actual molding itself. There's the numbers for the machine gun bays and so on that have all gone on here. One little thing, and this is one of those ones which I wouldn't say screwed up, but I almost forgot. There's a couple very small pieces that go on the extended wings here. And at this point, I've put in that clear port that goes on the leading edge, and effectively that's one whole wing ready to go. So yeah, at this point, very happy with it. I'm coming back again and basically doing lighting at this point. I'm using just white glue PVA. Some of this is really quite fiddly at this point. So it is tweezers. Be careful if you're using tweezers to hold some of these small parts, because we've all done it where it's surprising just how far they can fly off, never to be seen again. You'll hear it ping off something, but I don't even have carpet on the floor in here and I can still lose stuff that I drop. I have no idea how that works. So there's the radio masts and all of that going in. One thing I do now, and I've gravitated to, is just using white glue for them. They're not going to be super structural parts, but as soon as you start putting what I'd say hard glues on there, it's easy to mess up your paintwork. So this is really where we're getting to almost finished stages. I do come back, as I say, with just a little bit of blue to almost blend in some of those big decals. The undercarriage, everything all looks really nice. I haven't done any super weathering. I don't like something looking too tatty if I'm going to put it on display up on a shelf. The engine I was quite happy with, especially given its mixed background and the history there. Thank you, James, for that one. Bit of a mixed bag. One interesting thing I would say that is very good on this kit is the wing fit. When you're doing navy wings or folding wings, the fit that is engineered into it becomes crucially important. If you're doing the folded wings, you never notice, but if you're doing extended wings, in this case, it is important to have good fit, or you'll end up with couple mil gap there that just looks really crappy. So do be aware of that. I was really happy with how this come together in the end. Not perfect, a few little things that I would do differently or change again, but again, this is a nice one to go up on the shelf. no complaints. So you can see there where I've come back with just almost some light weathering and touch-up work. The decals themselves have bedded down nicely. The canopy is olive on the inside, so I did 2 layers on the canopy, inside, outside. And yeah, there's no complaints at all on the actual molding, tooling, any of that. It's definitely something I'd recommend. As I say, my biggest complaint is probably more just along the lines of configurability. I think this is almost a Japanese way of doing it, that here's the instructions, follow the instructions, you'll be good. So there's an F4U-4, a Korean War one. What I did think was interesting for those that are considering the merits of both is that the way the trumpeter kits tend to be done at this stage or this scale is much more of a mini engineering project where you build the hinges yourself from etched metal and almost like hand press them as rivets using soft metal wire, which is actually quite cool. So on one hand, the trumpeter is not as detailed and generally not in that same quality, but from a what would I say, hobby engineering point of view, it's actually quite fun making these hinges. And I think if you've never done it before, you can learn a lot. As I say, it's just pieces of etched metal, and the hinge itself is made by almost old school riveting the brass together, whereas on the Tamiya, it is a lot more pre-molded. So to do the ailerons the way I did have to clip a bit here and there just to get it angled the way I wanted. You can also see on that Korean War -4 the difference in the color. I think that was enamel, but definitely where I have noticed the big difference between the kits is on, essentially the configurability and the way the flaps are done. On a Corsair, they're always nasty. If you haven't done 1/32, I'd say do a simpler plane first. It's probably not the best place to start. Maybe a 109 or something. It's just a lot more simpler than the inverted gull-shaped wings. Just practically, you'll have one less headache to worry about. So there it is. My general thoughts are on, say, the trumpeter or the Tamiya. I think it's just a question of how much you want to pay. Is it twice as good as the trumpeter versions? Probably not. Is it a gorgeous kit? Yes. So I think it really depends on where you're at and what you want to do. If you really like Corsair and you're into Corsairs, save up your pocket money and get this one. If you just enjoy doing the models, you won't have any complaints with the trumpeter versions. So that's the two together there. I do hope you've enjoyed this build. It's dragged on. It's been a few up and downs on my end, but you can see, it's come together very nicely. I will be doing more of these Tamiya builds. I've got a few in my stash. I think mostly Spitfires. No surprise there. But I've become a bit more interested in also the A6s, the Zeros and so on. So I would like to get some of them done as time goes on. But this has come up as a beautiful kit. I'd highly recommend it. If you're into Corsairs and you like 1/32, definitely go for it. So I do hope you've enjoyed that. Thank you again for watching. If you haven't seen the others, go back and watch them. Thank you again.